So good morning, everybody. It's great to see such a large number of people registered to join us for this webinar, people from across the whole variety of Southpac International Group clients. So we've got some aviation people here from Southpac Aerospace, some certifications clients, some of our HOP people from the HOP Lab. So it's great to see you all here. Thanks for making the time to attend this webinar. The webinar this morning on Safety Recrafted. We're very pleased to have Daniel Hummerdal, our Director of Safety Innovation and Leadership, who's running this for us this morning. Daniel is perfectly placed to run this webinar given his storied career to date, starting out in aviation, an aviator and then an aviation accident investigator, before coming over here to Australia and getting involved in safety innovation in the mining industry. He's been a consultant, he's been a regulator, and here he is back now with Southpac. We're very pleased to have him with us as part of our team. So without any further ado, looking forward to handing over to Daniel, who's going to talk about Safety Recrafted. Thanks, Daniel. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be talking about this topic. I'm going to be talking about why I think change is necessary, why we need to look beyond the current state. And once we know roughly that we need to get away from something, I want to talk about how can we find a direction to head in, and what could that look like? And of course, once we know what that might look like, how are we going to get there? So I want to talk a little bit about that. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the I think there's a chat function, and Andy's going to sort of pass them on later. But I want to start with a story, and this is a story about a chief executive down in Christchurch in New Zealand. I lived there for six years in New Zealand, not in Christchurch, unfortunately. Anyway, he told me this story. He was the CEO of a electrical network operator company. So they were doing a lot of maintenance tasks on all kinds of, on the electricity network down there. And he was frustrated with health and safety. He was frustrated because they were not getting the risk assessments done correctly, or not in sufficient quantity even. So there was a lot of details missing that were not filled out the right way, and sometimes they were not submitted at all. So the health and safety manager had brought this to his attention. So they were talking about, what can we do about this? Because it's really important that we get our people to do risk assessment before they start the work. And they came up with this, it's not a revolutionary idea in any, but I've heard it many times before. And that was to go out and attend a pre-start meeting that we're doing before starting the work, and sort of catch them in the act of not filling out the paperwork. So he went out 6 o'clock in the morning, and there was a what he saw when he got to site actually surprised him an awful lot, because 4 of the 5 crew members were gathered around the bonnet of their truck, and they were drawing on the bonnet using whiteboard markers, and they were creating a map of the area where they were working. They had drawn the road, and where the cables were going, and where the poles were. So they were sort of mapping out everything that was on there. And I was talking about, okay, so then we don't expect it to be a lot of traffic. Let's put some cones and some signage over here. Do you think that'll be enough? And because we don't have a lot of traffic, I think we can just communicate by yelling to whoever is in the cherry picker today. And there'll be you, Bob, and can you be in there? And so we're just going through the work, talking through the situation. And what else? And someone said, well, a couple of weeks ago, one of our colleagues was here, and a dog came running from this field over here, I think it was. And, didn't bite them or anything, but he just kept barking, and it was, disturbed their workflow. So they just wrote dog ? On there. And this CE was quite intrigued to see what they were working on and how they were having this conversation. And then he spotted that 5-6 meters away, the 5th crew member sat on his own, filling out the risk assessment paperwork. So he went over to him and sort of pulled him into to the rest of the group. So just join these guys for this conversation. We'll talk about the other stuff later. So he let them finish that thing, and after they were done, he said to them, "I actually came here today to talk to you about the importance of filling out the health and safety paperwork stuff, because numbers have been missing and so on." So, but what I discovered here today is that you have actually come up with a brilliant practice that works for you. The whole purpose behind the risk assessment is to trigger conversations about the risks, the hazards of the work, the controls we have in place, and how we're going to manage that. And we need to document that we're doing these things, right? And as far as I'm concerned, you actually are doing all these things. So I just want you to continue with this practice that you have. But can you do me a favor to add your names and the date to the bonnet of the car and take a photo of it and send it to me? That way we actually have a documented trace that we've had this conversation, which is something that we need to show. But the important thing is that you have a practice that works for you. So this became a Damascus moment for this CE, where he really felt like, oh, we need to move away from certain things in health and safety. And we need to start looking for safety practices that work for people in the end. And I think there are lots of reasons why we should be looking at doing things differently in health and safety. And I'm sure you have your reasons. I want to share my top three. Why we should change away from something. And the first one I just put here under the heading of a float to the top, that it's a lot of power and accountability that ends up at the top layers of not only our organizations, even though that's true, but also within these supply chains of client to contractor, subcontractor, and the regulator on top of that. Everyone seems to think, in particular when something goes bad, we seem to think that someone should be in control. So we put pressure on that someone to sort things out. We launch what do we call them here? A royal inquiry when there's been a scandal of sorts. Or we throw the CE out and put a new one in. And we just constantly believe that control sits located with a particular instance of the system. And sure, some people may have more control than others, but it undermines this very networked and collaborative nature of work. And I think a lot of these interventions are actually anti-collaborative. It's making it more difficult for people to collaborate or to recognize that safety performance is actually a very shared endeavor that requires a lot of levels, a lot of different organizations to work together. So I think it's an unfortunate focus. It's an overly simplistic focus that those at the tops can somehow be in control and the rest of the organization is simply a delivery branch of that. But I think we need to start thinking about how can we create a more equal share of the burdens and the enablers, the power and the duties, that they sit equal across the network. So it actually enables good performance rather than skewing it in one way or another. The second point here is that we've seen a real explosion of bureaucracy, of work constantly being, increasingly circumscribed by procedures, by specification, how it needs to happen. Every time something goes wrong, we tend to add to this. And it's sort of a never-ending. It's actually really difficult for organizations to say, no, we don't need more of that. We need to actually scale it back. It seems to be that more is simply better. We do more in the name of safety. We count these activities and we rate them or score them. There's a whole sort of game going on, but very little of it actually adds value to the work being done. It makes work more difficult, if anything. And that's unfortunate. I think we need to start being quite critical about this sort of explosion. Is it actually helpful for work? Or how can we manage that in a way that it supports work being done and support the people that do the work? The third thing that I'm quite passionate about is I just call it outdated designs of the way we do these work instructions. And in fact, it's outdated designs of how we all design organizations. We've separated their heads from the body. We've separated the people that do the thinking or the design of things. And then we have the broader masses that are just enlisted for their sort of capacity to deliver on those designs. And that may have been a good enough model back in the day when we didn't have knowledge workers in our organization, where people were mostly doing physical work. And it was really important to think through the ergonomic solutions for that. And it was really good. But now people are educated. People want to contribute. They solve problems or they think about problems in all kinds of ways. So we really need to get to a design or a way of working. We have much more collective intelligence solutions in place. Hanging over all of these things and whatever solution we get to next is a question, are we actually getting better? And I think some industries are improving, other industries are moving backwards, and other industries are sort of plateauing despite unprecedented efforts. And unless we are really seeing a good result from our interventions, we should really be skeptical about what we're doing in the name of health and safety. So there are lots of reasons. There are other reasons why we should improve, but I think these are sort of three more than good enough reasons why we should say, hey, let's try to get away or move beyond that. Well, it's sometimes language is a bit difficult to get right here. How can we broaden this? But the question is then, where do we go to instead? What would work for everyone? And the question I have on top of this slide, I think, is a really good question. How can we create health and safety practices that work for everyone? Is the how question, which is very open and inviting. No one really has the answer for how to do this, but it also focuses on we. How can we as health and safety profession, as stakeholders in the system, how can we create this? Because no one is coming to save us. No one is going to do this for us. So we, as a community, we need to create a community around this question, really. And the last part is really, practices that work for everyone. It's not enough to have practices that work for the regulator, for the auditor, or for the client. They need to work for frontline. They need to work for the health and safety professionals. And ultimately, we need to think more in a more complex way about the needs of the solutions that we put in place, because if they don't, we're going to create problematic side effects of disengagement or not understand the nuances of work and so on. So when I engage with people, I ask them to consider this slide, which is really focused on sort of positioning two ways of thinking about the future. If we see the future as simply a problem-free version of the past, our task is really just tinker with it to create more compliance to the models that we might have, and sort of fix it up. It's really a problem-fixing approach. But I also think that and there are benefits to be had in going after improvement in that kind of way. But I think we now have an opportunity to actually set off in a new direction. I don't think that any of those more bureaucracy or more top-down control or, creating more separation between designers and workers are actually going to solve the challenge that we're in. I think we need a new direction for that, and tinkering with the existing worldview or approach, as I call it, is not going to cut it. But looking at the future as a greenfield site is, imagine you go with Elon Musk to Mars and you want to create, something brand new. What would that look like? What if we were unconstrained by the historical trajectory? Would we create it the same way, or would we actually design something completely different? And that's an exciting, creative question that I think is a conversation we should have at all levels of society, actually. For not only for health and safety, but where are we heading to? So to me, this highlights the question of what kind of workplace do we want to create? What does good look like? What heritage do we want to leave behind the day we retire to our kids when they come in? What do we want them to experience? So when I run workshops on this topic, I ask people to have a sort of guided imagination with me to really be concrete about what success looks like, and then start sharing it with them. And it's remarkable how similar it is what people are looking for, both what they want to get away from, but what they would like to create. It's a lot of overlap between people. And here is this is a dynamic collection of what people are telling me. Safety practices that don't work for everyone are really focused on seeing people as this sort of source of trouble, seeing people as a hazard even. and they think we should see people as the recipient of trouble created elsewhere in the system. We should treat people like intelligent collaborators, as problem identifiers, as problem solvers, and ask them, how can we support you? How can we set you up for success in a different way? So you can see how this moves down this table, and it's less about bureaucracy or providing proof for external approval, and more about creating shared discovery and between different layers of the organization. That's what people say that they want to have. Less about blanket solutions and more having sort of local solutions that work, a bit like, the CE discovered around the bonnet of the truck. So here is a little hint about what people are talking about. And I invite you to join this, well, actually invite you to start this conversation in your own workplace about what does good look like? What does success look like? We created, we have some success, but what would be really cool? What would be great to have in place? What's our dream situation? And I think we have a bit of an institutional lack of creativity, not only around health and safety, but a lot of our workplace is so burdened by business as usual. So opening up the conversations over coffee about, what's your dream site? What would it look like? Is a great place to start. Let's talk about success a lot more and invite more people into that discussion. So how are we going to get there? That's the question. When I run my workshops, I get this result and I ask people, so what's stopping you? Why don't you just go after this? And there's a fairly predictable list of excuses coming out around, I don't have permission, the client doesn't want this, the regulator is not interested, our subcontractors are not ready for it, I don't have permission, I don't have money, I don't have time. All these deficits, all this focus on what we don't have. And it's, of course, how we feel when we're facing all of a sudden we have to do a marathon or climb a steep mountain or whatever this might feel like to you. So I help people to break this huge, complex challenge down into bite-sized chunks that are actually small steps that we can take right now without even asking for permission. We talk about this as, I'll talk about this as sort of zigzagging towards this new reimagined state that we want to create. So we don't have to figure out a new strategy or a new implementation roadmap. We just need to set off in this direction and start reimagining or start redesigning our existing practices, but do them in a new kind of way. So you might have a health and safety committee, for example, in place. How can we infuse that health and safety committee with some of those ingredients that we had on the previous slide? How can we give greater autonomy to health and safety committees to improve their workplaces? How can we create greater opportunities for frontline workers to vote, to give feedback on the recommendations coming out of incident investigations? These thousands of opportunities or ways we can actually start evolving our practices in this direction. But evolution needs to have a direction, and that's why we're doing that sort of reimagination first. And then we sort of scale this down. We make small steps, and then we see what happens, and then we iterate, or we take the next small steps, and we decide where to go to next from there. So I talk a lot about micro experiments as a really cool and useful tool for anyone, really, to create change in a system. So micro experiments is just learning through action by pushing the system just a little bit. It's very quick, it's very informal. It's, even though it has the word experiment in it, it's not sort of scientific about it. It's actually creating a point of difference and just see what happens. So in these, I'm not sure, they're green boxes, I think they are, lime green, mint green box. We talk about learning by doing first, that this is about exploring something new. It's not an implementation map. Head off in this new direction, just nudge the issue, just do a small thing and see what happened. And the goal is simply to trigger a discussion about what's possible, what's feasible, what's desirable, what's acceptable. Just see what happens. People might say, hey, we want more of that. That was really cool. Or they might say, ooh, let's not do that. At least you've learned that. and you've done it in a small scale version that costs next to nothing to do. We need to be really pragmatic about this. I encourage people to explore around the edges of an issue rather than at the center, because systems move more freely at the edges. An example, what I mean by this might be that incident investigations are normally at the center of the entire health and safety issue. It might be easy to create change around health and safety committees. They sit more in the periphery of the system. But if you want to do things around incident investigation, you might want to consider, is it easier to do something new around recommendations? Or is it easier to do something novel around how we collect data? Not all issues are at the center of that. So just trying to be a bit smart about where can we actually try something. And then pick something that you can actually do on your own without even asking anyone for it. If you can't get permission to ask for giving your recommendations to frontline workers to give a score on, for example, if you think that that is a good idea, well, take an old incident investigation that has all been completed, put the recommendations up on a whiteboard in the workshop area and get people to write comment on it. That could be a pretty cool micro experiment to run. That is something you can try, and without asking for permission, probably. You have to sort of right size these things and make sure that if it doesn't work out, nothing really bad will happen. So that's how we're responsible about innovation in this. We don't take risks that will produce bad outcomes for the organization or for the people, but we do it to learn, to make sure that we sort of move in a positive direction. I'll talk more about that in the next one, but also try to make it playful and fun, because that's what's going to propel you to do these things, not by making too heavy to do. Mistakes that people do around this, they aim for perfection, or they make it too big. They try to make themselves the hero, put themselves at the center. I made all this happen, rather than making some subtle changes to the system and just observe it. And they don't put an end date. I encourage people to try to think about a micro experiment as something running over a week or a month, if they can. It takes some of the burden away from having to perfect things. And it just, frees us up to think in a small kind of way about these things. There's, of course, a template. This is what I've come up with around, from trying this a number of times, and I've tried to make it really pragmatic. On the left-hand side, we talk about, what is your idea? You might say, I want to give more autonomy to your health and safety committee, because I think that's actually going to be more motivating for people. That's your rationale for doing an experiment. So you write that down, and then you sense check this with someone. Do you think is this logical, that this change in autonomy could actually lead to more motivation? Yeah, I read Dan Pink's book. It's fine. It's totally how it works. Should work. Okay, how are you going to do it and move into the center? You have to design this. Well, what do you mean about autonomy? What are they going to be autonomous about? What kind of freedoms are we going to give them? Is it decision making? Is it around the schedule? Is it about recruitment? Is it about some financial stuff? Oh, it's the financial. I thought about giving them some money. Okay, how much money? Is it $5,000, $20,000 you want to give to them? And what are they going to do? You need to think through the frames of this. Oh, I'm going to give them money. I'm going to come back in a month and see how they spent it. In case they, if I like how they spent it, I'm going to give them more money. If you can make that happen within your degrees of freedom, I think that's a pretty cool one. The last thing here is a little bit about thinking through what you should be looking at. It's impossible in a complex system to know what changes are going to come, but I think it's smart to think through, what do you think are the good outcomes that you're going for here, but also think through what's the worst possible outcome. And make sure that the worst possible outcome is somehow acceptable. If it's not, you have to go back and design this in a different way. This is how you end up in feeling comfortable making these changes. Could this be useful? Can you make this happen? Is it safe to fail? If you have green lighted these questions, you're good to go for your micro experiment. So now, I think I started with this question of how can we create health and safety practices that work for everyone? And I think the future of health and safety is really what we collectively imagine and work together to make a reality, right? So for that reason, I'm very keen to create collaborations. I think there's a broader discussion that just needs to happen, but I'm also keen to create very intentional collaborations around these things and making sure that people can stay connected beyond a workshop, beyond the get-together, that is an ongoing collaboration. So at Southpac, we've created a platform, we call it Collab, which is really allowing people to do lots of things in collaborating. The first one is that they can just ask for help. You might, turn to your community and ask, hey, does someone have a strategy? Does someone have a solution for this problem? And it goes out to the people on this platform. And you can create your own community of interest if you're interested in AI or HOP or whatever it is, or you can join an existing community on there. And within that, you can ask for help. We can provide mentorship. We can ask for mentorship, and sort of creates a gift community, that people work together in the direction that we discussed earlier. And I think it's a great way to make new connections where, on the platform, people get paired up randomly with other people on the platform once a month to just keep expanding the network. And they organize spontaneous coffee connects where they just talk about their work and how they can learn from each other. At Southpac, we've just launched a set of safety recrafted events that are coming to hopefully a city near you. They're going to Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, and Melbourne. I put the address in here, and I'm sure Andy can drop it into the chat feed as well, to make sure we can just go to our website and register if you want to be part of a structured conversation. But I think the most important thing is that we start a conversation about what success looks like, and we invite a lot of people, not just a few select people, but actually make this a really broad conversation to have moving forward. So that's it, really. That's what I had planned for this webinar. If you have any questions, I'm sure you can send them to Andy, or Andy might have some questions for me as well.
Thanks, Daniel. That was really good and very on point. One of the things I neglected to mention when I did the introduction was, please feel free to submit any questions you may have for Daniel. So you can do that through the question and answer function, or you can send them through the chat feed. So please feel free to send anything through. I guess one of the questions that many people ask, and this is particularly true, I tend to find in the aviation industry, where it's kind of well known, we're the most regulated industry in the world. We have regulations for everything. So what about the regulators? How do we work around the fact that we have this regulatory framework which tells us all the things that we should be doing?
Don't work around it. It's the workarounds in general are problematic, especially in aviation.
Okay, I probably should rephrase that. How do we work within that?
Yes, no, that's exactly it, right? So I think the first thing is to recognize that also the regulator has an appetite for change. It may sound a little bit foreign if you haven't engaged that much with a regulator, but my 6 years working for the workplace regulator in New Zealand showed me, and I know the same for the regulator in Australia, that there's a huge recognition that our current methods of regulating, of practicing health and safety, are not enough. They're not impactful enough. And there's been an inflow of compliance innovation tools, or innovation tools for regulators. So they're increasingly becoming aware of this space where we can create little innovation or compliance sandboxes where we try new things. It doesn't mean that every regulated person you mean has an appetite, but somewhere in the regulator is an appetite. It's a question of finding an inroads and sort of engaging with that. But also think that being transparent about what you're doing, and just saying, putting this on full display and saying, hey, we're trying new things over here. Do you want to come and have a look? Invite the regulator into that conversation is a better approach than doing it by stealth or under the radar. And see if the regulator, want to be part of it, and make it very invitational, because this is a really complex space and we need a lot of actors to be interested and have a stake in this.
And I guess one of the things as well, which we can always draw people's attention back to, is the majority of times legislation and regulations are written from an outcomes-based or
Mm.
performance-based perspective. So it does actually still leave quite a lot of latitude for how people do things and how they achieve those outcomes.
Nice. That's absolutely. I mean, just go back to the story where I started with the CE came to site and he had a specific compliance solution in mind that this is what compliance looks like of filling out the piece of paper. And then he took a step back and looked at the sort of performance requirement, which was much more around we need to assess the risk, we need to control them, and we need to document them. As long as we do those three, I don't care if you use a risk matrix, if you use this piece of paper, is actually a huge degree of freedom available there. And it's funny almost how, for example, the risk matrix has become such a ubiquitous tool, even though a lot of industries, it's not mandated you have to use that specific tool. Some industries actually do, but not all industries. So
Mm.
being critical about the safety solutions we have in place, challenge the status quo and, push the boundaries a bit about, well, what could we create instead? What if we didn't do that? What would we do? What would that look like? And that's a lot of creative fun to be had in that space.
Mm. I think particularly the thing about risk matrix is probably an easy example that where you can easily criticize the existing tool, because what tends to happen is the existing tool becomes a distraction from the intended outcome actually, rather
Mm.
than helping us to achieve the intended outcome. We end up spending more time trying to figure out likelihoods and consequence definitions than actually figuring out what's the risk, what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
But just moving on to another one of your excuses that you talked about, which I liked tackling that head on, excuses of why we don't do things differently. You talked a little bit about leadership. Well, what would be your answer if someone was to say, well, what about our leadership's involvement? We need leadership support.
Mm. Yeah. So I think you should engage your leader in this discussion to start with. Sometimes I think we give our leaders too much control. We wait too much for permission sometimes. If you ask for permission, sometimes you just have to wait forever. And by keeping this in a sort of bite-sized size, to work on this in a much smaller kind of way to make sure that I actually think this through. You are taking the ethical responsibility for the new thing. You don't have to wait for your leader to approve this. I think you should be transparent about doing it, and tell people that you are doing this and give them a chance to stop you. But don't set yourself up in a situation where you have to constantly ask for permission. Tell people, I'm doing this. Come and stop me if you want. It's fine. Um, but be passionate about the world that you want to create and be a force for good. And then you will become your own leader in that space. But you don't have to be subversive in doing so. You can actually be very collaborative and transparent and be a host for the change that you want to see.
Yeah, nice. And in line with the question, or in line with the thought around leadership, we've got a question submitted here from Mark, and he asked the question, what are your thoughts on helping a senior leadership team embrace safety being recrafted? Have you seen a successful micro experiment run in this space?
Yes. So I think if you were to run that sort of the first part of looking at, what is the desired organization that you want to create? I am yet to discover that senior leaders want to create something different. In fact, all the seniors leaders, the GMs and the heads of that are having these sessions, they talk about the stuff that's on the right-hand side of the table. And a lot of the time, that's what most people want to have. The stuff that's on the left-hand side of the table is what we get somehow because we're so held back or configured by the system that it's really quite difficult for anyone to create this change. And of course, they may have certain incentives or believe in certain ideas that this might be better. And sometimes we need to challenge leaders as well as health and safety professionals as well as frontline with different points of views of saying, hey, these control needs to be pushed to much more to frontline, for example. That's a good discussion to be had then. When you look at that table, how do we shift control, not in a sort of laissez-faire, but how can we take this step by step? So some of the, I mean, the story I shared initially is a story of how a chief executive wanted to try something new. Or what's important to business leaders, because they are looking for change. They are constantly trying to create change in organizations. So it's important for them to understand how this direction is going to support the vision, the strategy they're working on. So actually engaging with them and say, actually can help you, this, if you have a vision for safety that is sitting on the right-hand side, you can see how this aligns with a strategy that they're talking about, and use that as, it's not even a Trojan horse anymore. It's just say, hey, this aligns, this is supportive in that direction. So can we run a micro experiment around that? How do you can you connect the dots for them, help them to see this not as a foreign object, but actually something as a stepping stone for a bigger thing that they want to do. So create alignment, or use alignment as your excuse if you want to have that.
Nice. I guess just also while we're talking leadership, and it's obviously something we spend a lot of time talking about, you and I. What sort of leadership are we looking for in an organization which wants to be more innovative and creative? I guess around safety, but even beyond safety, is there a preference for leadership style?
Nice. I think, if you look at, let's call them traditional or mainstream approaches to safety leadership, they tend to be, they can actually prevent a lot of what we're talking about here, because they're sort of based on that left-hand side approach, which is an approach that, leaders know, and they have the answers to everything, and they need to role model and be the expert on all behaviors and all standards, and be the sort of the shining light of the organization, and everyone should follow, and not think too much, but just try to aspire to be like the leader. And that doesn't mean that leaders are completely useless. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think if we instead recognize in a knowledge worker era that knowledge is a bit distributed and disconnected, and it's dispersed across the system of people working together, the role of the leader, or there's an opportunity for a leader to pull that knowledge together, to create a space, or to host a space where people can connect, where they can build a bigger puzzle together of, well, I've seen this and you've seen that, and what does it all mean? How can we make sense of it together? A leader that is convinced that people need to be the solution to the challenge you face, rather than just a compliance tool, right? A real belief in that people hold the potential for whatever performance challenge that you face. And when you have that as your belief, your challenge as leaders, not how do I reprogram these semi-lost robots that we have, but rather, hey, you're a person, I'm a person, can we talk about what future you want to create, and what do you see as obstacles? Are we focusing on the right things? Are we doing the right number of things? Are we doing things the right way? Are we getting the best out of you? Those are really important questions, really open questions for, let's call it a host leader in that space, rather than that heroic leader that we may be more used to in many organizations.
Yeah, nice. Maybe watch this space, folks, for more information on leading as a host. Final question that I've got for you: how do I get on the collab?
Yes.
Involved with getting
Collab. At the moment, it's available to the people that attend the Safety Recrafted session, but also the people that have been making it available the next week or so to the people that have been through the HOP training that Southpac provides at this stage. So we're just launching this now for these new cohorts. So it's going to be an exciting next couple of weeks where people start getting connected on here.
Excellent. So Christina Cooper, in line with that, has said, any thoughts about a New Zealand collab?
Yes. So absolutely. These safety recrafted sessions, we've already been in New Zealand and done a few of these. So we have a small sort of budding New Zealand community around collab. But I'm very keen to come back to New Zealand and run more of these safety recrafted sessions and invite more people into this. So there's multiple ways of getting on that if the platform is the space. But safety recrafted is definitely coming to New Zealand when Southpac and New Zealand are ready for it. Hopefully early next year.
Yeah, and in terms of geographic location, there obviously are already users on the collab platform who are in New Zealand, right? And
Yep.
yeah, there's no barrier of entry in terms of people can join from wherever, really.
And I think that's an exciting space. You know, collaboration has always been seen as a very powerful way to create change. But we come together in these workshops and you know, the energy peters out at the end of the day because people go back to the work. But now with the tools that we have, it is much easier to stay in touch with people. And especially if we can make them connected across the organizational domains and boundaries that we normally have and have a space for them that is fairly protected. So it's not too cluttered with distraction, but actually quite focused on the collaboration we're trying to create. So now I think we have a great space to create powerful collaborations.
Excellent. All right. Well, you want to get involved, folks, you know what to do. But it's been great to see so many people online today. Thanks for the questions, for those who have submitted a question. Please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions. But thanks for your time, and thanks very much, Daniel.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone.